You might think that two elderly women wouldn't make fierce opponents, but then again, you've never met the Smith sisters. Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the glass of milk, this is the Oreo, the essential stuff in between, the personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. If you're gonna pick a target for a crooked overtaxation scheme, you could do worse than to pick on two elderly sisters living on an inherited farm. At least, that was the prevailing theory of tax assessor George Andrews, but he soon learned his mistake, as did the entire town of Glastonbury, Connecticut. As Andrews learned, you don't mess with the Smith sisters, and their battle helped fan the flame of the growing suffragette movement. The Smith sisters were remarkable and ahead of their time. There were 5 in all, raised by their equally remarkable mother, Hannah, to reject their traditional role in society. Hannah authored one of the earliest anti-slavery petitions, which was presented to Congress by John Quincy Adams. She assisted along the Underground Railroad, and all 5 of her daughters were dyed-in-the-wool abolitionists. They were also well-educated, which was unusual for the time, but this allowed them to chart their own paths and make their own individual mark on the world. Hansie, for example, eventually developed a device for helping blacksmiths shoe cattle, and she designed and built her own boat for the Connecticut River. Cerinthia cultivated her own varieties of fruit trees, vines, and berries. Julia still holds the distinction of being the only woman to have completely translated the Bible from its original languages. Like I said, remarkable. 2 of these women became teachers and passed their intellectual tradition on. By 1872, however, there were only 2 sisters left, Julia and Abby, aged 80 and 75 respectively. They lived a quiet life looking after their cows on their family farm in Glastonbury, at least when Abby wasn't making fiery speeches regarding women's suffrage. That quiet life was upended one day when they were presented with a property tax bill that had mysteriously grown. The sisters were curious about the increase, since they had made no provision for saving the money to pay the higher amount. The tax collector looked over his books, and it seemed that the only people who had seen an increase in their tax assessment were the Smith sisters and 2 widows in town. All women landowners, and not a single man. They initially paid the tax, which was over $200 in 1872 money, or nearly $6,000 today. Other taxpayers were free to pay only 12% interest on the tax owed and not pay on the principal. So that's what the sisters did the next year. But the tax collector came back with orders to collect the full amount. Men could get away with paying the interest only, but someone wanted the Smith sisters to pay up immediately. If this were a cartoon about a bullfighter, this would be the moment someone waved a red flag in front of it. The Smiths may have been older, but they were no less fierce and steadfast. The first thing that happened is that Abby Smith went to the town meeting to confront the male voters there over the issue. She did not disappoint in her ferocity, stating, "The motto of our government is, proclaim liberty to all the inhabitants of the land. And here, where liberty is so highly extolled and gloried by every man in it, 1/2 the inhabitants are not put under her laws, but are ruled over by the other half, who can, by their own laws, not hers, take from the other half all they possess. How is liberty pleased with such worship?" What they asked for at that meeting in November of 1873 was simple: a vote. As they were paying the largest amount of any taxpayer, all they wanted in return was a say in how it was spent. They were literally being taxed without representation, and the comparison did not go unnoticed, even if their argument to the town did not produce the desired results. So the Smith sisters decided the only sensible thing to do was not pay. Not until they were given a vote in the town. And that is how the Glastonbury War began. The men did vote to continue to exclude the Smiths and other women. They swore up and down they were compelled by the language of the state constitution to restrict the vote to men only, but they must have thought they had some authority in the matter since, they took a vote. So, no vote for the sisters meant no property tax from them for the town. And tax collector George Andrews took that personally. On New Year's Day in 1874, not long after the Smith sisters had aroused the ire of the town by asking for the right to vote, Andrews came for their cows. They asked him to leave 2 out of the 8 so that they wouldn't get lonely, but he led all but 1 to a barn of a neighbor. Abby Smith, who had raised the cows herself, was devastated. On January 8th, the Smiths bid on the best 4 cows sold at auction, the cream of the crop, which raised the tax and expenses. That's right, they bought their cows back. Things were getting real for the Smiths. In exchange for speaking out in protest, they were punished in a way that male taxpayers were not, since there were several non-paying men on the tax rolls who were not seeing their possessions sold at auction. The injustice was obvious, not just to the Smith sisters, but to the rising tide of the press. The newspaper, the Springfield Republican, had followed the story from Abby's speech before the town leaders, which the Hartford Courant newspaper had printed in full. The Springfield Republican cheered on their cause, publishing regular letters from Abby on the situation and organizing a fund for the sisters. The Smith sisters were a cause célèbre, and word was spreading about the new American Revolution moving in Glastonbury, pitting those fighting taxation without representation against the villainous oppressors of the male gender. Several other local newspapers, even as far away as Boston, began to rally readers to their side. More joined them in being bullish on the Smith sisters, and soon the news had spread across the country. The Smith sisters took full advantage of the spotlight, giving lively, charming interviews to anyone who would amplify their situation. The cows, meanwhile, were gaining their own fame. One Chicago shop sold flowers made from their tail hair with a ribbon reading, "Taxation without representation." Despite the growing fame of the sisters and his own growing infamy, Andrews didn't stop coming for them. In fact, he decided to take the beef to the next level. In June of 1874, Andrews auctioned off 11 acres of the Smiths' farm. While the auction was advertised as taking place at 2 p.m. on the property, Andrews watched off-site as his sisters waited for an hour and ultimately left in search of the auction. Once they left, he snuck in behind them with a lone bidder and held the auction as the sisters came hoofing it back. Land of that sort would have sold for between $2,000 and $4,500 on the open market. Andrews sold it to the only bidder, a crooked neighbor who had been pushing his way onto their property for years, for the amount of $78.35. It was a rigged deal from the start. It was also illegal. The Smith sisters sued Andrews and won. Andrews was required to exhaust on the collection of personal property before auctioning off real estate, and the sisters had more than enough personal property to satisfy the tax judgment. Andrews was ordered to pay $10 in fines and costs, and at the end of the trial, he sneered at the sisters that he would be coming just as hard again for them in the next round of tax collection. He appealed the judgment, and the judge on appeal ruled in his favor. The sisters would not get their land back, and worse yet, the judge had ordered them to shoulder the costs of the dispute, such as a property survey. When Andrews next showed up at their door, he told them that he could take all of their property if he so chose. But what he took next, in 1876, was 5 of their cows and some of their bank stock. The Smiths were only able to buy back 2 of the cows this time, out of the 3 total that were sold. But they made enough to satisfy the debt. And they came home to yet another tax bill. Also, the auctions for the bank stock and the cows were advertised in the paper without the names of Julia and Abby Smith, or even the town of Glastonbury. The collector knew not to draw attention to the women. It took out ads to thwart him anyways. Some sources say that the Smiths never got their land back after the appeal was decided against them. But that may not be quite right. Julia Smith detailed the entire saga at length in 1877 in her book, Abby Smith and Her Cows, which was a collection of newspaper articles and letters that tracked the length of the ordeal. At the end of the book, the Smiths had gone to trial for a third time over the land, and the final word from them came with them waiting for the judge's decision. A footnote at the very end of the book, however, gave the outcome. The judge in the third trial decided in their favor. Andrews had been firmly kicked right in the derriere. Abby died the following year, and Julia, now the lone surviving sister, decided that the time was right to finally sow her wild oats and take one last adventure. She became the only sister to marry, taking the plunge with Judge Amos Parker at the ripe old age of 87. That's what I call grabbing the bull by the horns. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to milk a few more cow puns? Drop me a note. The address is yell@americanesoterica.com. More information on this show and its episodes can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.